So we will be moving on to our next session, which is the panel discussion on accelerating India-Sweden green transition. And now I would like to invite Arati Davis, who is a Senior Vice President with Sweden-India Business Council. Arati's work focuses on clean energy transition, and she's also the head of Secretariat for the Sweden-India Transport, Innovation and Safety Partnership. Over to you, Arati.
Thank you, Sanju, for that kind introduction. And I'm very happy to be here to have the first panel discussion of the day, to unpack what we heard in the inauguration session, and to set the stage for the coming day of discussions on a pre-Glasgow climate partnership. We have with us in the studio Robert Andren, the Director General of the Swedish Energy Agency. Connecting with us online, we have Amit Chadha, MD and CEO of L&T Technology Services, Martin Lundstedt, CEO of Volvo Group, and TV Narendran, President of Confederation of Indian Industries, all longtime partners of the Sweden-India corridor. Before we start the specific questions to each one of you, I wanted to throw an open question to the panel. We sit here on the eve of Glasgow and the climate discussion. One of the key elements of that discussion will be collective action with business, industry, academia, R&D, and government. I'd like to ask each one of you to give me a one-sentence answer, 5 keywords, what the audience and us should keep in mind as we go through the day. You represent industry, industry aggregators, and government. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Chadha.
Sure. We'd like a level playing field between citizens, corporations, and governments from COP 21, 26. We'd also like clear guidelines and, of course, some financial incentives that can help us through this journey in the early days as it happens. More than 5 words, but that's my take.
But good words, level playing field. With that, I'm actually going to move to Robert to respond to industry as government. What is your expectation for the next week?
Political leadership and commitment, both to meet the alarming reports that we're hearing from the scientific community of a 2.7-degree warm-up. Also to meet and facilitate the industry's leadership now in changing towards sustainability, much more pronounced. And thirdly, also to actually political leadership to deal with the energy situation we have now with high prices by looking at tomorrow's solutions rather than yesterday's.
Thank you very much. Energy prices, of course, something we can come back to later in the day. But I want to ask now to end today's the industry discussion with Mr. Narendran in India. Before I come to Volvo, you speak for Indian industry. You've had a long partnership with Sweden, with different of the sponsors and partners that we have represented today. What does CII, on behalf of Indian industry, want to see next week?
I think better alignment between the developing and the developed world on the transition plan, and greater thought on the complexity of the transition and the socio-economic consequences and how we plan for that.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm going to then end this lightning round with you, Martin, to ask you as Volvo Group, international industry partner. You, of course, are taking on many steps in kind of mainstreaming most of the discussion that's happening next week. What would Volvo like to see?
No, first and foremost, I agree with many of the other comments already made here. But most important, I think that we have outlined the plans now already before COP26. And when I go there, I would like really to discuss tangible actions together so we can see these results now, because a lot of the plans are set for 25, 30, 45, 40, whatever, but we need to start now, and we need to come together because there are new type of business models and solutions required. So between academia, authorities, and industry, and really looking forward to be there.
Great. So before I come back to you, Martin, I want to just, for our audience, sum up what we heard today. Level playing field, political leadership, alignment, and actually operational roadmaps to take business forward. But I want to come back, Martin, because, of course, when we talk about climate, when we talk about the challenges that we face, 1.5, 2.5, 2.7, we know in the last 10 years, the demand for transport has increased. We know in the next 10 years, the demand for transport will increase. How does Volvo align itself with what might seem to the outsider a conflicting discussion?
But first and foremost, I think it was well said also by Mr. Narendran about, we need to find a sustainable roadmap that is both including the environmental, the social, the ethical, and the financial, so to speak, prosperity for different parts of the world, or all parts of the world eventually. And their transport, logistics, and infrastructure play a very important role. We know that that has a very tight connection about developing society as we know it in terms of GDP per capita, etc. But that development is also driving a number of other challenges, obviously. It's about congestion, it's about noise, it's about close by neighborhood pollutions. It is about also, of course, the impact it can have on climate change. And therefore, more transport, more infrastructure needed, but it needs to be considerably more sustainable as we move forward. And that is, I think, a big challenge, but it's also great news for all of us that would like to continue to innovate in this arena. So what we are doing in that is obviously to say, okay, we will participate in the development. And India, Sweden, Volvo, and all our partners in India is a very good example of that. And not at least, I mean, before we come into the green transition, I think we have done great progress together in the area of safety. That is also part of the sustainability journey, for example, for transport and innovation. So now, what we will do here is, of course, utilizing the great opportunities we have in terms of technology innovation, both when it comes to propulsion systems, electromobility. It is about, and when I talk about electromobility, it's both about battery electric solutions, it's about hydrogen or fuel cell electric solutions. It is about renewable fuels. But it's also about utilizing the strength of digitalization and connectivity to optimize these type of flows in different shapes and forms, because already today we see an enormous potential when it comes to energy efficiency, when it comes to route planning, when it comes to safety and proactive maintenance planning, etc. But of course the big step will be when we are coming together as society, business and authorities, not only as OEMs, as big companies like ourselves, but also in the complete ecosystem here, and not at least with our customers and their customers to decide, okay, how do we want to proceed here? And what the good news is that we see a very quick development in so to speak, both the deployment of new technologies, but also how we think about the business models around this. I mean, in order to have a very efficient, for example, transport system, it's not only about the equipment that are connected digital and also with the right type of sets of technologies, but it's also about infrastructure, it is about the grid capacities, it is about the green generation of energy. And those are factors that are actually coming very neatly together between India and Sweden. We have the resources about it, we have the opportunities to go about it, we have the innovation power to go about it also. I mean, I think this is a field where we really can join forces, and that's the reason why the Volvo Group, for example, we have the one of the biggest sites of R&D, we have the biggest site of IT and connectivity. We have, of course, a full value chain, including R&D, the whole operations, both for India. For India, it's a home market, but also for exporting, etc. So in this area, we can do a lot, and we need to do a lot. And this is, of course, one of the key factors for both India and Sweden being successful in a global world.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to take the last words you've said about innovation power. One of the key aspects of the climate dialogue next week will be climate finance, to make innovation power accessible and operational and harnessable. Mr. Narendran, I'm going to ask you, now you've been working with Sweden for over, I think CI has had operations with Sweden for over 20 years. Is there something that you see on the horizon that can help us build a B2B framework that will allow us to harness climate finance for resilient climate innovation and investment?
Sure. You know, Arati, I think this journey is going to be expensive, right? And that's very clear. I don't think anyone's arguing about the direction or the need, but there is a complexity of transition and finances right in the middle of it, because governments will have to pay for it, industry will have to pay for it, customers will have to pay for it, right? So you need to manage this transition well. Second thing is the size of the problem from a financing point of view is huge. You know, even if you look at what was discussed in COP15 and COP21 about $100 billion a year coming from the developed world to the developing world, that's now been pushed to 2025, but that's an elephant in the room which has to get discussed and sorted out. India itself has estimated that it will need something like $2.4 trillion between now and 2030, or rather from 2015 to 2030 to do what it wants to do. This includes expenditure for mitigation, for adaptation, for disaster management, resilience, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of money involved here. But the good news is there's a lot of innovation happening. And I think the heart of the Indo-Swedish partnership is about innovation and technology. And how can we leverage innovation and technology and work the ecosystem to get the funding for it, get the financing for it. There's a lot of capital out there in the world. There are a lot of startups in Sweden, and India is now home to the third largest number of unicorns in the world now after China and the US. And so how can we leverage that innovation which is there to solve some of these problems so that you can find innovative solutions and use finance to scale it up. So I think that's where the Indo-Swedish partnership can work together. And there are specific areas we need to work on. We certainly need to look at storage solutions for renewable energy, for instance, because India is well on track to meet its renewable energy targets, in fact, probably exceed them. But unless you have solved the storage problem, how are you going to transition from a coal-based grid to a renewable energy-based grid? So there's a lot of money to be spent there. There is a lot of work to be done on carbon capture, usage, and storage. Because again, India is a coal-dependent economy. It will reduce its dependence on coal. But as long as you have coal, you need CCUS solutions. And of course, finally, you need to find hydrogen cheap and at scale, and also create the hydrogen infrastructure that is required. And of course, it has to be green hydrogen. So I think there are a lot of challenges out there which will need good ideas. I think there is an idea pipeline out there. There are startups out there who are working in these areas. We need to marry those ideas and opportunities with the financing that is available so that we can make this transition as smooth as possible.
Mr. Narendran, I couldn't have had a better segue to our next panelist in terms of what you've put out on the table right now. To look at elephants in the room, to look at how do we create frameworks for India and Sweden's SDGs and global SDGs. Robert, the Swedish Energy Agency has been working with India now, I think, for over 10 years, creating opportunities in many of the key words that Mr. Narendran just raised: storage, energy efficiency, new technologies, and innovation for energy development. How would you see the opportunities for India and Sweden to work together to create ambition, but also operational real-time SDG roadmaps?
Well, I think that besides the fact that you need, hopefully the governments are showing this leadership and commitment in Glasgow, but also, I mean, all around the year, so to say, to actually make a change of how the society is functioning, going from fossil-based to fossil-free economy and society. We also have to show this in concrete ways, and I think that that's what we are doing now, trying to find projects, trying to find demonstration projects that shows that it actually can be done, that the cost is not at all a problem in the long run, because you will gain much more, both from a climate perspective, but also from a social and economic perspective, both from a company's side and also for the society. So I think that using the global processes that we have, mission innovation, for instance, the UN processes, besides only the climate COP, is so important, because innovation is at the heart of it, as has been said by the other panelists. And I think that then we need to find ways of both finding the new innovations, but also put them on the market, scale them up and commercialize them. And so that means that we need to find arenas where all these actors meet. And we have done so in Sweden-India perspective. And I think that we could share that way of working with the rest of the world and show that it concretely is done. We have, as was said earlier, a smart grid project together, which is one component that we need to address. We are evaluating the projects as we speak here, and will announce, I think, later on in November or so, what project that will be given the means to be tested in real life. And also the projects that were launched or the program that was launched this morning between DST and Vinnova, for instance, is another such concrete example. So that is another thing that we need to highlight and show the world, perhaps both in COP26 next week or the weeks to come, and in other fora and other processes. I think that sometimes we're talking about the costs of the clean energy transition, but I think that what we need to realize is that the cost of inaction is far, far more severe to the global societies and the governments. But that perhaps is a bit more into the future. But from a government perspective and the public sector, I think that is very important to have in mind. No, it's a cross-border challenge that needs cross-border solutions, that needs cross-border cooperation. And Sweden and India is showing how it can be done.
Thank you. I think what you're saying, and I think what makes sense to the panelists here, is real-time operational pilots, test beds, to see what we talk about. The abstract is not as meaningful as actually walking the talk. Thank you very much. And actually with that, I'm going to come to our last panelist. I started with industry on the Swedish side. I'm ending with industry on the Indian side. You've heard what the government has to say in terms of operationalizing commitment and ambition. Now, L&T Technology Services is also working in this area. And as an engineering and services company, what does L&T see it can do on the ground in terms of making the climate ambition a reality?
Sure. So, Arati, thank you for that. If I actually start off by saying that sustainability is not a zero-sum game, Robert spoke about the cost of inaction. Well, just one data point, the first half of 2021 saw global insurers pay about $40 billion in losses, and there was another $90 billion in economic losses just from climate-related events. I can go on and on. I was in New York on September 1st, flash floods, all that. I mean, I was fine. I'm sitting in front of you, but it was a harrowing time. Right? But I'll move on. If I look at what industry can do, I'd actually break it up into 2 or 3 parts, right? One is there's governments, and we talked about them creating common guidelines, citizens being more responsible. But most importantly, if I look at companies and what people like us are doing, so there are 17 sustainable development goals that the United Nations came out with, from no poverty going up to the 17th one, which is around partnership for the goals. Well, 7 of those, in my view, are clearly something that somebody like us can work on and is working on, starting with good health and well-being, to clean water and sanitation, to affordable clean energy, to industry, innovation and infrastructure, to providing sustainable cities, responsible consumption and climate action. I'll give you some examples. Martin spoke about electrification. Well, LTTS has invested in battery charging infrastructure and technology labs in India, as well as in Peoria in Illinois, providing onboard and offboard charging capabilities for people to do proof of concepts, etc. We've last month launched a hybrid vehicle of our own, bringing all battery technology as well as cooling technology, etc., that we had developed in our labs. We built a sensor lab providing alternatives for lower energy consumption, if that's what people are looking for. We've launched energy management tools for plants as well as commercial buildings, which are being utilized in Tel Aviv, in buildings being leveraged in plants in Pennsylvania, and we're looking forward to roll this out further. We are right now dabbling. We're trying to work on models that could help us with entire sustainable cities as we speak. We worked with various companies in Gothenburg, in Stockholm, and beyond Sweden, in Finland, and our origin being Denmark, in Denmark, towards designing and engineering to a greener future. Having said that, I do want to make one point. We've actually announced, or we're about to announce, we will be getting to carbon neutrality and water neutrality as a company by 2030. So that's what we've been trying to do in helping our clients and others, industry in general, to make it a much better level playing field for the future.
Mr. Chadha, thank you so much. And with that, just to our audience here in the room and also the ones online, what you've heard today we'll be discussing at length during the panels during the rest of the day. We're looking at energy, finance, test beds, innovation, and first and foremost, collective action, working together across the triple helix to create change on the ground. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and please stay with us for the rest of the day for the discussions that we're having to talk about the Innovation Accelerator and the different ways in which the Energy Agency is working with India. Is there anything you see that you'd like to, in the next year, create a roadmap for and discussions that the audience here today could know more about?
I think that's a kind of an evolution that we're doing with India. But what we're doing is actually taking parts of the way we're working into other countries at the moment that we see possibility and potential in developing it. So, and then we are looking at what we're doing in other countries that are also key markets for our companies and our export, and see how we can evolve the collaboration with India. But I think that what we want to do is to get more Swedish agencies and more Swedish actors to realize the power we have within this collaboration. And as was said also earlier, it's not one way, it's both two ways work we're doing at the moment. And I think that India will see that there are huge potential and possibilities in what is happening in Sweden today, in the northern parts of Sweden, with fossil-free steel production, with Northvolt battery production and stuff like that. So it's a lot of win-win for both countries.
Absolutely. And Sweden, of course, has just joined the International Solar Alliance as a partner for R&D and test beds. How do you see that evolving in terms of discussions and dialogues? Because Sweden, of course, has a number of test beds on the ground already with the Innovation Accelerator and other dialogue partners in DST. Is there a move to kind of elaborate and expand now that you have these different framework partners?
I hope so. I have to say that. But I think that what we need to do in Sweden as well is realize the solar importance of solar panels and solar production, because it's not a big thing in Sweden as such, but we have a frontier research on that in that area, and we do have a lot of startups and very interesting actors that actually could make a difference in other parts of the world with those innovations. So I hope that we will wake up and realize the potential of solar, the solar area, so to say, and actually see that the exporting is huge potential and very important, rather than looking at how important it is for the Swedish energy system. It will be marginal here, but increasingly important still.
And of course, the discussion on storage, batteries, and how to move forward, which we have strong actors on the ground in Sweden.
That's why you need a system perspective.
Exactly.
It's so many components, and you need to shift the whole system. Try to do that. And as was said earlier by my colleague from Vinnova, Darja, is that you also have a whole value chain approach to this and a circular approach. And that is the challenge, to move from one component into the whole series of components that you need to shift simultaneously, really.
And we have that panel later on today when we talk about Industry 4.0, the global supply chain pivot that needs to happen as we move towards a circular economy, and how industry has to understand and have patience to make those changes step by step, but also allow for mainstreaming innovation in that process.
Sure.
I'm actually going to turn to Mr. Narendran, because you mentioned hydrogen, and of course the immense power that has in terms of creating investment for climate. Could you tell us more about what CII is doing in that space? I know that there's a mission on the ground right now in India, and there's a lot of discussion on financing that mission. Just a few words, and then I'm going to ask the other panelists as well to discuss new technologies, new fuels, and what this can mean for where we are today.
Yeah. So I think the government of India has announced a hydrogen mission. There's a lot of private sector announcements as well on hydrogen, because we realize that if we were to transition out of coal, we need to move to gas and then to hydrogen. So there's a lot of infrastructure being built on gas. And of course, eventually, hopefully, they'll transition into hydrogen infrastructure. India also has very aggressive renewable energy plans. I think we're well on track from nowhere to something very material over the next 10 years. So I think we'll rely on new sources of energy, but storage becomes extremely important because large country, there is a national grid which is being built. So, there's sources of renewable energy in some parts of the country. You need to reach it across to the other parts of the country. You need to have good storage systems, smart grids, etc., and hydrogen to supplement it. So between electrification with renewable energy and hydrogen, hopefully we'll be able to move towards a cleaner future. But it calls for a lot of investments. I know that in Europe, a lot of investments are being made on creating the hydrogen infrastructure. India needs to create that hydrogen infrastructure as well. India also needs to have the policies which are evolving to help industry transition into a cleaner future. So I think there's a lot of work which is to be done. A lot of intent is there. A lot of work has already been done. But I think CII, as an industry body, has sustainability as one of the keywords in our theme this year. So we are working with a large number of small companies. The big companies know what needs to be done. Many of them are already, in transition. But 90% of our members are the small and medium-sized companies in India, and we are helping them transition. And CII has a few centers of excellence which helps its members do this transition. So a lot of work is going on that, and hydrogen is certainly an important part of that.
Thank you so much. And of course, from Sweden-India Business Council's perspective, CII is a trusted partner. We've been working with you since the beginning, and a lot of the discussions we have are with your counterparts as well in India as we move forward. But new fuels, Martin, to you. Of course, new fuels, road safety and innovation. You touched upon the need for not necessarily moving the large industry, Mr. Narendran, but actually looking at small industry and helping them get the tools. Innovation and startup engagement can be critical for that. And of course, Volvo now has Campex in Bangalore. It has Campex in Gothenburg, where these innovations are harnessed and capitalized for an operational output. Martin, any comments on new fuels, road safety and the transport challenge?
Well, no, first and foremost, I think obviously the way of working that we do now, and that is really connecting also to what we have heard earlier, that it's about the system thinking, governments, authorities, but also, of course, business. But when we talk about business, it's both about, of course, the big corporates that can push, so to speak, the agenda, but we will not do it without having a really, really good ecosystem of the best in different niches. And that's the reason why we have created this type of platform with Campex, allowing actually us to really get in touch on a daily and a more informal basis with a number of great, both startups, but also well-established companies, but have an innovation arena in different shapes and forms. And when we talk about now, both of course on safety, where we have, and we will continue to drive that agenda, that is very close to our heart, obviously. But also when it comes to the transportation, the big bet now, of course, is to really make the transformation into fossil-free solutions. By 2040, the whole value chain, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, for Volvo globally, we are in 190 countries, need to be fossil-free in order to actually deliver the 1.5. And that means obviously that in leading countries, we need to be considerably north of 50% already by 2030, and that is around the corner. And what we see here now is that when we are ramping up, and we are doing that now, we took a big order on heavy-duty trucks, for example, more than 100 trucks a couple of weeks ago. That will come more and more. The interest is huge. But also it needs to be complemented both between battery electric and fuel cell electric. And the reason, there are a number of reasons for that. I mean, when it comes to applications, but it's also about exactly what has been said here, the whole energy system together with the transport and infrastructure agenda. Because hydrogen is nothing more or less than the other side of the coin of electrification. And the reason is obviously, how to now take care of the fantastic opportunities with green generation of energy that will come with solar, with wind, with other type of solutions. We need to have storage. Already today, 40–50% of the windmills are just turning empty during the day because you don't have the consumption. Electricity is consumed when it is produced. that will do for a number of applications during daytime, during peak hours, etc. But then you need really to have this interconnected, and that's the reason why it's so important. The good news is about that is also we see the importance, for example, on hydrogen and fossil-free steel. We delivered the first, commercial vehicle application made of fossil-free steel last week. Together with SSAB, and hydrogen will be a very important input material into that, green hydrogen. But that makes also the hubs for hydrogen available then to utilize then fuel cells, both for stationary power, complementary power, but also then for transport. So what we see, and that's the reason why we invest heavily in fuel cell technology, into battery technology, but also in the digitalization around this. And the Volvo Energy, the latest business area after Volvo Autonomous Solutions also, are really into this. Okay, how do we cope with this emerging landscape of grid, network capacity, storage, green generation, together with our implementation of green transportation and infrastructure. So it's super fun, and we need everyone to participate. And again, India, Sweden together are sitting on a number of core assets, digital innovation, energy innovation, and also same values about thriving into this new space. So looking forward to work closely together and to get to India finally, because I really want to get there as soon as possible again.
Myself included, absolutely. But of course, the lead IT transition, that India and Sweden are leading together, and the green steel has been a huge innovation. And with industry accounting for 30% of emissions, that actually has a large impact for the way forward. Mr. Chadha, Martin mentioned the network, how important it is to have the network to move forward, to create the messaging and the information and the capacity to make the changes needed. The L&T Technology Services has a large network. How does that work in terms of you actually operationalizing the information required to make change?
So I'll answer this question in 3 ways. So Martin, number one, we met in the past, as you're aware, lived in the US for 20 years. I took the leap of faith, jumped onto a flight from New York to Bangalore, Mumbai last weekend. It's safe here, you can come, there's no problem. I'm in our offices in Bangalore. So that's to say it's okay. I had more N95 masks and sanitizers than clothes when I came over, right? So that's a reality. But having said that, before I go to network, I do want to make a point. If I look at the US, where I've now lived for 20 years, if I look at the Nordic region, and I look at India, I should tell you that demographics are changing. If I talk to our employees today, I talk to our stakeholders today, everybody is concerned about how are you spending energy? How are you conserving water? It's not just consulting, it's not just doing it for others, but what are you doing in-house? I'll give an example, you talked about the network. So as an engineering company, we set up labs for our customers. These labs require energy. Last week, during our board meeting, my CFO comes up to me and says, you know, business is great, we've got a great set of numbers, but can I please ask you to tell the sales team to not take any more orders that requires labs? And I said, why? He said, because it's not energy efficient and we're going to get negative towards the energy sink as opposed to positive. So one part of the network, one part of being global, local, whatever, is bringing everything together, providing more information and letting people take charge of smart choices. I mean, would you, and I'll give examples. Go to the CPG industry, how much water are they consuming? Can Pepsi or a Coca-Cola get to zero discharge? Can a P&G or Unilever get to zero discharge? I mean, can they reuse the water, etc.? This is one part of it. But another part is providing them the information so they can make those smart choices. But having said that, the entire computing landscape that you see requires a lot of energy. One of the things we're working on right now, and no names here, but with some semicon companies, is to see how do we produce or help them produce chips that will take less power, consume less power, that can finally give back to the grid, or at least take less from the grid. So with that, I mean, long answer, but that's broadly as we see it from a network, demographics, cross-industry standpoint. Last thing, US never used to be concerned about these things. Very honestly, you would hear a lot about it in Europe, you would hear about it in India, but not a lot in the US. That is changing. People are realizing it's important for us to be able to be right on the right side, if I may. I look forward to seeing the horizon of, the seaside or the ocean side near Pennsylvania, dotted with with the windmills. Time to come, but we'll see where it goes. Maybe it'll look like Copenhagen or near Aarhus, like the way you see those windmills.
Thank you so much. So to the audience, you've heard L&T Technology Services, Volvo, CII, and the Swedish Energy Agency. And what we take away from today is we need to walk the talk. And for more of that, stay with us today for the rest of the panels and hear how this is being taken into programs and partnerships. Thank you so much. And until I see you in person, namaste.
Thank you. And happy Diwali in advance to those that know it's Diwali next week. Thank you.
And I would also like to personally thank Mr. Martin Lundstedt, Mr. Narendran, Mr. Chadha, and Robert here also for your partnership and support to make India-Sweden Innovation Day happen. So thank you so much. Please continue watching. We have a full day full of fantastic speakers.